Well, so what are we gonna do today, Cousin BW?
The same thing we do every day, Melvin. Try to take over the neighborhood. Hey y'all, Bloodwing here. Y'all don't know this, but this is the second time I've recorded this. The first time I got all the way through a 35-minute recording, realized my mic wasn't plugged in my entire time. So and I was happy with that take. So we'll try to get this in. But I thought I'd do another episode of An Old Fart's Perspective. Today's subject is one that I find interesting, and I'm hoping that you will too. Something I've been talking about or thinking about for a little while. As I've mentioned before, I'm really new relatively to this area of YouTube, the roast videos, the anti-SJW, if that's the label you want to put on it. And if you're here listening to me, I'm assuming that that's the kind of content that you at least like sometimes, or you wouldn't be listening to me. But I'm relatively new to the area, so I don't know a lot of the history on how it came to be on YouTube, but I've heard. If I get any of this first part wrong, as far as the YouTube history of it, be sure to let me know down in the comments below, because I could sure get it wrong because I wasn't here. But you all remember Dusty Smith's infamous alt-right is invading the skeptic community videos. And in that, he mentioned that this kind of content was an outgrowth of the old atheist skeptic community. And I have no reason to doubt that, and I've checked with other people, and that appears to be the truth. That's where it indeed come from. What he didn't mention, what I found out from others, is that there was an implosion of that community that also happened about the same time that this kind of content started to come about. But that was a couple years, I hear anywhere from 2 to 4 years ago. I don't know. Like I said, I wasn't here. I've also heard that Sargon of Akkad, if he wasn't the first one, he was one of the first ones to start doing anti-feminist, anti-SJW content. And I have no reason to doubt that at all either. But it brought up the question in my mind, even though that makes it relatively new on the scheme of things in YouTube, is it really a new concept in media overall? And almost immediately my mind went to the answer of no, it's not new, because I very much remember an individual called Morton Downey Jr. that done very much the same type of content that we do, and I'll get more into Morton Downey here in a little while, because it really didn't start with him either. It goes back much farther. But in my research, in my thinking about it, I found this very interesting. I hope you find it as interesting as I do. And listen while you're listening to this. But so I got to thinking, and all of this information that I give you on these individuals I'm going to be talking about can be found on their Wikipedia pages. And yes, I'm generally suspect of Wikipedia, but in this case, as far as histories, it's usually pretty accurate. And for the purpose of this, I'm just giving a general overview of these people. It's perfectly acceptable. You can go find it on your own. I'm not going to put the links down below, because I think that you, my audience, is perfectly smart enough to be able to work a search engine. So if you're interested in what I'm talking about, you want to find out more, you can look these people up. They're easily found and easily available, and some of them have some of their old TV shows and whatnot on YouTube. But I followed it back as far as the early 60s. And it may very well go back even beyond that, but that's as far as I took it. That was far enough to make the point that I'm going to make at the end of this video, or hope to. Back in 1964, the ABC television network started a TV show in order to go against a late night TV show in order to go against the very popular Tonight Show. And it starred a person by the name of Les Crane. Now, Les Crane was a good-looking fellow, by all accounts, and he had a very different style than what they were used to seeing. He was very confrontational in his interview style, but it was said of him that even though he was confrontational, he was able to do it in such a way that helped, that the person was not offended. Most often is not. Sometimes they would. He was controversial in the subject that he covered. He covered what was considered taboo subjects at that time, such as racism and homosexuality. He's considered to be the first to actually interview an openly homosexual person on television. He was different in that he relied on audience participation. He used what was called a shotgun mic to talk to people in the audience and get their input on things. He started in radio, as many people did in that day, in the early days of television, and was very outspoken there as well, and often outraged callers and that would call into his TV show. But he done a lot of controversial things. Like I said, he was the first to interview an openly homosexual person. He actually tried to work up an interview on lesbians. And remember, this is 1964, 1965. But the network put the kibosh on him. And as a matter of fact, that was the start of the end for him. They put more and more pressure on him to be less controversial, and the show died out after a couple of years. But in that time, he had a lot of big names, a lot of people that weren't showing up on other talk shows. He had Richard Burton, he had Shelley Winters, he had Jackie Robinson, he had all sorts of different people on his show. And he would touch subjects that other people at the time were not touching. So we see a bit in him of what we do now, as far as coming out against regressivism and coming out against what popular thought is, and so forth. Now, round about the same time, another gentleman by the name of Joe Pyne came about. Joe Pyne was similar, but different. You might say that while Les Crane was probably the Sargon of Akkad of his time, Joe Pyne was more the Bering of our time, of their time. He was much more in the face. He was known much more for upsetting the people that he interviewed. As a matter of fact, they would often storm off the set, or he would throw them off the set. Chairs were often thrown, threats made. He was very in your face. He was one of the first people to take on feminism on the air. So very much a connection there between what we do now and what he done then. Joe started out again in radio and is one of the first people to pioneer what came to be known as being a shock jock, or having a call-in show and arguing with the people on the phone and so forth. And one of his trademark insults at that time was go gargle with razor blades. He had quite a sense of humor. But eventually, he found himself on TV. And early on in his time on TV in 1965, during the Watts riots in Los Angeles, if you don't know what that is, look it up. It's quite a thing. It makes the Black Lives Matter protests of today look tame in comparison. But during that, he was interviewing a black militant on his TV show. Joe opened up his suit jacket to reveal that he was carrying a handgun on the air. And the person he was interviewing, the black militant, opened up his jacket to show that he was also carrying one at the same time. And, of course, the station come down on Joe for that. His show was suspended for a week as a punishment for that stunt. But that's the kind of guy that Joe was. He wasn't strictly just right-wing. He was against racial discrimination in a time when that was not popular. He supported the Vietnam War. He was against hippies. He spoke out against homosexuals. He spoke out about feminists. But he would support labor unions. And so forth. So he was kind of on both sides at the time. He also had a lot of controversial guests. He would have members of the KKK on his show. And remember, this is 1965. He had members of the American Nazi Party on his show. He had members of the Manson clan on his show. He had Marxist political activists. Matter of fact, Ron Karenga, who is also the creator of the holiday Kwanzaa, was a frequent guest on his show. Robert Dorman, who they called B1 Bob, who later became a congressman from Orange County, was also a frequent guest on his show. Gay activist Harry Hay, John Burnside appeared on his show in 1967. He'd done a lot of things that were really controversial and just weren't being done. Now, remember, we're talking the 60s. Remember the 60s? When the first kiss, mixed interracial kiss between Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura on the show Star Trek, and yes, that was the first interracial kiss on television, caused a huge stir. Huge. Look it up sometime. It's hilarious. But he was very controversial, very outspoken, wasn't afraid to be confrontational. He had a lot of excuse me again, had a lot of signature lines. He'd tell people to take a hike, call him a jerk, dummy. He was kind of intimidating in the way that he dressed, and he always kept his suit jacket open. He kind of give off the impression of being a plainclothes cop. So when he would get up to tell people to take a hike, he would stand to do it, and was very intimidating, which had a very subtle threat. He had some really good lines he told people. One of my favorites is he once told a caller to take out your false teeth, put them in backwards, and bite yourself in the neck. I'm going to have to remember that. I like it. And he once told somebody, I could make a monkey out of you, but why should I take the credit? He told people that he didn't have any respect for anybody that would come on his show. When he had his radio show, he would close it with good night, straight ahead, and get Castro. Yes, that's the Fidel Castro that just recently died. He closed one program by telling Anton LaVey, and if you don't know who he was the founder of the Church of Satan. He told him, he says, I'd like to tell you where to go, but you'd enjoy it. And another one of my favorites, he was talking to a hippie, also vegetarian, by the name of Louis Marvin, who was speaking out against the slaughtering of animals for meat. And Pine says, do you know that there is now scientific proof that when you cut a tomato, it screams? You are a killer of tomatoes. So I think if you look, you can see quite a bit of a connection between what he was doing on his TV show then and what we do now on YouTube, except he was doing it in person. Most of us are just taking apart videos, but he was doing it in person. Some of us hold a lot of live streams, and whenever they can, they get guests from the other side on, but today they just don't seem to want to cooperate with us. We don't have the budget to pay them to come on or anything like that. But I think you can see the connection. But again, it only lasted a few years. Maybe these shows were ahead of their time. Too early. I don't really know. But you come forward quite a few years, and in 1987, a TV show that only lasted for 2 years came on the air called The Morton Downey Jr. Show. And yes, this is really the logo from the TV show. And what they did is they kind of focused on his most prominent physical feature in that he had a very big mouth. And it was usually open because he often was screaming at someone or yelling or insulting them. But it rose like a shooting star. I mean, it hit the top almost overnight. And it disappeared just as quickly. We'll touch a little bit on why it disappeared here in a moment. But Morton often credits Joe Pine as being an inspiration. And by the way, Joe Pine was an inspiration for a lot of that kind of radio or TV show host. Bill O'Reilly, Glenn Beck, Wally George, Alan Burke, Chris Matthews, Bob Grant, Michael Savage. These all give credit to Joe Pine for being an inspiration for them in what they do. But Morton was a throwback to that old show. He was very much in the face of people. A lot. Didn't care to call them names. One of his favorite insults is he would call people pablum puking liberals. Anytime he faced somebody that was regressive, he would also tell them to zip it. And he hit the top so hard and had such an impact on the country at that time and on television viewership that those phrases, the pablum puking liberal and the zip it, became a part of our culture and our speech for quite a while. You would hear somebody around almost every week or every other day saying one of those lines. It was just amazing how quickly he entered our culture. But this was a different time, so he was a chain smoker and he smoked on the air. Couldn't do that now, for sure. But he did then, and he would often blow smoke in the faces of people he interviewed if he didn't like them. He literally would. If you ever get a chance to look up any old clips, and I know there's old clips of Morton Downey on YouTube, look it up. You'll be highly entertained. I mean, he was so over the top that some of the trash TV today, like Maury Povich and Jerry Springer and all that, kind of have roots in it. Although what he did was much more political. It wasn't just, it might look on the surface like it was controversy for the sake of controversy, but he had a political objective. And he actually started out as a Democrat. In fact, he was very much involved in the campaign of Teddy Kennedy in the 60s. So it kind of come around full circle. His fans were called loudmouths because of the insignia that was on front of the podiums. He had these two podiums that was in front of the audience area, and they would come out to either ask questions or just flat out insult the people that were on the show at the time. They started dressing in just really outrageous costumes. It was like a costume party out in that audience, and I never did quite figure out why that was or what that had to do with what was going on, but it became a habit. It was just almost a circus. But he had a huge impact. One of the people that was on his show more than once was somebody that is well known to us today. The Reverend Al Sharpton was on his show more than once. And in fact, Al Sharpton actually got in a fist fight on Morton's show that Morton had to break up. Al Sharpton was also on a show, and this is probably the pivotal moment of Morton's show, in reference to the Tawana Brawley rape case. Tawana Brawley, for you that don't remember or aren't old enough, was an African-American young girl, 15 years old, from Wappingers Fall, New York. And in 1987, she accused 4 white men of having raped her. Now, not only did she accuse them of raping her, but she was found wrapped in a garbage bag with racial epitaphs with marker all over her body, and she was covered in feces. And not only did she accuse 4 white men, but there were 4 prominent white men, police officers, and a prosecuting attorney. And of course, the entire black community, well, not the entire, I don't want to say that, not all, hashtag not all, but a lot of the black community come out in support of her. And of course, Al Sharpton was one of the first ones. He's an ambulance chaser then, just as much as he is now. Wherever the spotlight is where you're going to find Al Sharpton. And Bill Cosby, and numerous different ones. But she made this accusation. And partially because of information that was released on the Morton Downey Jr. show about the case, a grand jury later decided that they would not bring charges because the evidence showed that it was more than likely she was making this up. It was not true. Now, to this day, she still claims it was true. But there were witnesses that said they heard her parents say out loud, oh, they're going to find out we're lying. They know we're lying, and they're going to come after us. And there was tons of other evidence that just pointed to the fact. And it was believed that she'd done it to get away or to get out of punishment from her parents, her stepfather and her mother. Her stepfather was a very violent person, was known to hurt people. In fact, he had stabbed his previous wife multiple times and ended up shooting her to death. How he was out of prison, who knows? But he was known to beat her and alleged that he probably sexually assaulted her. She was a wild child, often out spending nights with boys, and she would get in trouble over that, and is believed that she pulled the stunt to get out of that, or to get away from it, or to deal with it. But at any rate, it was shown that she was probably lying. And to those third-wave feminists today that say, listen and believe, you got to believe the women. False rape allegations have been around forever. This is 1987, and they've been around long before that, for sure. But yeah, it's one of the reasons I don't believe in listen and believe, because I remember this case very, very well, and it was quite prominent. Now, that wasn't the only thing Morton covered, but it was one of the pivotal moments. I can remember him having members of the KKK, Nazis, all kinds of celebrities and political activists, and Man, he just was not afraid to get up in your face and call you names, and he didn't care how big and famous you were. I mean, Al Sharpton didn't like him at all. Even though he kept coming back on his show, he did not like him very much at all. Now, unfortunately, what happened to Morton is what happens to a lot of people when they rise to success as quickly as he did. He started to believe his own hype. And that was his downfall. And he even was caught faking a physical attack on him. He claimed to have been attacked in a restroom, beaten, his hair cut, and swastikas written on his forehead with a marker. One of his staff found him lying in the bathroom in that condition. And he admitted later that he'd done it himself. Much later. But it was pretty well assumed that he did pretty quickly on. And that was the beginning of a real downward spiral. He is unfortunately no longer with us. He died of lung cancer from he was a heavy smoker his entire life. Chain smoker, as evidenced on his TV shows. And he passed away. But he leaves a huge legacy. For the 2 years he was on TV, he affected our culture a great deal. Like I said, we wouldn't probably have this trash TV like Maury Povich and Jerry Springer and all of that ilk if it weren't for Morton Downey Jr. But we also wouldn't have the Glenn Becks and the Rush Limbaughs and the other people like that, likely because of Morton Downey Jr. Whether or not you agree with any of those, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we wouldn't, he was kind of a pioneer in what he did. But other people before him had done it. So, as I've shown, this kind of content has been around at least since the mid-'60s. And I have no reason to believe it wasn't around then. So, you might be saying, why am I talking about this? What's the point? What made me think about this? Well, recently, with all the burying stuff, it showed some chinks in our armor in this community, if you want to use that word. Showed some weaknesses. Showed there might be some division because we had some people in our community, quote unquote, going against other people in our community, quote unquote, about that. Showed some division and whatnot. And people started wondering, is this signaling the end? Is it going to explode as the old atheist skeptic community did? Heard stories about what happened to it and how it fell apart. It wasn't just they started making other content, which many of them did, but it fell apart. I mean, I've even heard that Christy Winters was once part of the same group. And look where we're at now. So, with Atheism Plus and all of those things. But like I said, a lot of you, there's people that know a lot about that part than I do. I'm just going by hearsay because I'm a latecomer. But because of the recent situation with burying and the kinks that show, people are getting worried. Does this mean it's going to fall apart? Is it going to go away? Is it going to morph into something else? And my answer to you is no. Will it change? Yes. Will some of the people that we know today that do this content maybe do something else or disappear from the internet? Sure. And that kind of thing has always happened. I mean, I'm sure you can think of people that used to be good before I came around that aren't here anymore. That don't do content anymore. They very little do it. And I've seen some of them that I've followed start to change. Start to do less content. You're going to have changes. You always will. But I think by looking how there were shows even back in the 60s, similar to what we do now, that there's always been a market for it. Wherever there's regressivism, there's going to be a market for the other side. And regressivism, I think, has existed ever since, at least since Western society has existed. there have been factions that could be labeled regressive. Now, the agendas they push and the faces they wear might change over time and be different, but they've existed. And they're going to continue to exist. And I think this is a natural kind of reaction to the rising of third-wave feminism and the popularity of social justice warriors and the transgender Tumblr phenomenon of Black Lives Matter and all that, which had become popular and is still popular in some sections of YouTube. I think the rise of what we do here is just a natural occurrence. It's just going to naturally rise on the other side to even out the scales. And I think as long as there's regressivism, and there always will be in some form or another, there'll be an audience for what we do. So I don't think you have to worry that it's going to go away. It might change, it might morph, but it'll always be here. My nephew once, many years ago, when he was just getting out of high school, came to me and asked my opinion on what I thought about him going to a trade school after high school and learning to become a mechanic, and because he knew I had a lot of experience in that industry. And I told him, I said, one thing about it, as long as there's cars, and I have no reason to believe that there won't be cars around for a very long time to come, there will always be a need for mechanics, and even more and more so now that they're becoming more and more difficult for the average person to work on for themselves. So you'll always have a job. There'll always be a need for you, as long as you're good at what you do. Now, it's a body breaker. You show me someone that's been a mechanic for at least 10 years, and I'll show you a person that's had at least one back surgery. It is hard on the body. So much bending over, staying in that position for hours on end and whatnot. But you'll have a job. There'll always be a place for you. And I think as long as there's regressivism, and I have no reason to believe it's going anywhere, or anytime soon, it might change. The face of it might look different a couple of years down the road. Maybe this transgenders crap will go away. It'll be something else. Maybe third-wave feminism will go away, and maybe it'll become fourth-wave feminism or something else. I don't know what face it will wear, but I think it'll be there. And if it's there, then there'll naturally be a need and a market for what the other side, for the people to take it apart and to be critical of it. So I personally don't worry too much about it going somewhere. We might not be on YouTube, if YouTube keeps going the way they're going, maybe they'll run us off. I don't know. Sometimes it looks like they're going to, but I don't want to get into tinfoil hat area here. But if they do, we'll just find another format, another platform, likely Minds, which is a great platform. If you haven't been to Minds.com, do it. It's great. It's still in beta. Got some issues, but go do it. My name over there is the same as it is here. So is my Twitter handle. I've had this name online since the early to mid 90s, and I'm not going to change it anytime soon. So, yeah, I'll go check that out. But, or Daily Motion or vid.me or any of those things, it will go somewhere. It'll be somewhere. It may not be on YouTube, But I think that we can see that it's existed for a very long time. It might be fairly new to YouTube, but that's because compared to television, it's a fairly new medium. It is the television of today. You understand? Whereas those shows that I pointed out were on television, YouTube is the medium of today. And so that is where it's at now. Tomorrow, who knows what it might be. If we get to the point where we have virtual reality that is viable and not have to wear these big clunky goggles like they do now or whatever, which is much more viable, if it becomes more viable than it is today, 10, 20 years down the road, it may very well be in that medium. Whatever the popular medium of the day is, you'll find it. You'll find both sides there. I guarantee it. And it's always been that way. I mean, through the days of radio and the days of television and now the days of the internet, social media, and, and beyond. So my question, is it new? No. Is it new to YouTube? Relatively. 2 to 4 years is still very young. But is it going anywhere? No. No, I don't think so. There'll always be a market for it. There'll always be a need for it. Because, as I said, and I don't mean to beat this dead horse, wherever you find regressivism, it's just going to be natural that the other side exists. Its very existence almost demands that the other side exists. It's kind of like Batman and the Joker, right? For you geeks out there, the one really couldn't exist without the other. One completes the other even though they represent completely opposite sides. And that's the way I see our community and the social justice community. One side begets the other. So I don't think we have to worry about there. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the subject that I talked on today. I certainly enjoyed talking about it. Certainly enjoyed the research of it. Again, I recommend that you go look up old Morton Downey Jr. clips. If you've never seen it, you're going to be really entertained and think, wow, this was really on TV? Because it couldn't exist in today's. The social justice warriors would get together within a day and have it no platformed. No question about it. Of course, classics like All in the Family, Archie Bunker couldn't exist today. Too many hurt feces, But, yeah, go look it up. Go check him out. And anyway, I'm going to end it there. Since this is the second time I've narrated this, I'm starting to lose my voice. I can feel it. And so I need to get to editing this so I can get to bed at a somewhat decent time, because I got to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and babysit, which is coming in just a couple hours. So anyway, thank you. Hope you lasted to the end. Oh, one more thing. If you liked what you seen or you had a thought about it, please feel free to comment down below. As you've probably heard, YouTube has changed their algorithm, and part of what it's based on is interaction with the video, which includes comments and thumbs ups and so forth. So if you like it, give it a thumbs up. It just takes a half a second. If you don't like it, thumbs it down. But do something. And if you want to comment, you have a thought, or you liked it, or whatever, put it down below. I've been getting some pretty good reactions, some pretty good comments in my videos. Didn't always have that, but it's starting to pick up, and I want it to continue. And if you disagree with me, put it down below. You might not convince me, but we'll talk about it. And those things will help my channel to grow. And the more it grows, the more that my grumpiness can get out there to other people that haven't heard about me, and that might like what I have to say. When I used to sell cars, they had a saying, there's a butt for every seat. So I know there's more people out there that haven't heard about me that would like it. I just know that there are, and you can help me do that by doing those things. Anyway, enough begging, because I really don't like doing that. And I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm going to get out of here. So as always, get out of my yard.